Okay, I want to tell you just a little bit about Herman Melville, so I'm going to just read over some of the highlights. I thought it was a pretty good biography on Britannica, so you can look that up yourself to get more of the details. If you have the book Literature and Its Writers, there's a good biography in that book of him as well. And then I'll tell you a little bit more that I know that my background that might help you, I hope, to better understand the story and perhaps generate some ideas. All right, so Herman Melville, he was born August 1st of 1819 in New York City. He died September 28th, 1891, also in New York City. He's an American novelist, short story writer, and poet, best known for his novels of the sea, which were very popular in his lifetime, and including his masterpiece Moby Dick, which many consider to be actually the great American novel. So his heritage and youth, it says that Melville's heritage and youthful experience were perhaps crucial in forming the conflicts underlying his artistic vision. And let's see, I took a picture of this and we're seeing how it's turning out. 1 second. See how good my picture taking was. Not so good in this section, so, but hold up 1 second. Sorry about this. You can look more details up about this part because I can't see the pictures that I took, and my phone is not working to look things up to go where I want it to go. It has a crack on it. We've got little technical difficulties going on. I do Melville he was very. I'll just do it off the cuff. You can look up the finer point of the details on your own. So he was really well known for his sea stories. Typee is one of them. He was very successful with that. And people loved his sea stories. And he went away to sea himself. He lived for a time on an island with cannibals, like he really did. And he wrote about his experiences, fictionalized them, and they were very wildly popular. So he was very successful in that. But then when he tried to do something different, other than what he'd been successful with the sea stories, the stories were not successful. So Bartleby the Scrivener was really puzzling to people when it came out. When it was first published in a magazine, people were absolutely like, what is this? What does this mean, right? And you might have been thinking that when you read it, right? So people were rather perplexed. So as he continued on, he was trying to do some creative things, and they really weren't accepted at that time. People wanted more of his sea stories, but he wanted to do something different. So by the end of his life, he basically had, a day job as a clerk in this customs house to support his family, and he was not well known as a writer really at that point. He had a very happy family life. He had a very happy marriage, and you can read more about the ins and outs of Melville. There's a lot to him, but in a nutshell, even Moby Dick was not successful in his lifetime. It was wildly successful, at a certain point after his death. So we do consider him possibly America's greatest writer at this point, but that's not what he was thought of at the time during his lifetime. So, during the 19th century, there was I'm going to give you some little background about what was going on in the country. All right. During the time that Bartleby the Scrivener was written, and so of course Melville was a product of his society and was well known, knew what was going on and all that. So just to kind of set you like into that place that perhaps could generate some ideas for you for the story, for writing about the story if you were wanting to do so. So at the time that the story was written, so the story was, what did we just say? It's approximately 1850 or 1851, right in that time period. So what was going on during that time in the country? Pause for you to reflect on that, right? So the country was on the brink of war. This was before the Civil War, and we were on the brink of war over slavery. I mean, at the time, it was states' rights, but it was the right to own slaves was the big right that the southern states would really were rather up in arms about, right? So and that was a big issue. If you can kind of recall your history classes, American history, about we had the Missouri Compromise, which states were being admitted to the Union as either a slave state or a free state, right? And so this was really a compromise that made no one happy. Things were just very intense, right? So this was all going on, right? And so meanwhile, while that was going on, there was this group of folks in Massachusetts, in New England, called Transcendentalists. And so these folks were very intellectual, creative, very progressive. They were far ahead of their time in their advocacy for women's rights. They were anti-slavery, very anti-slavery, but they often went farther than that and were wanting equal rights for all races, right? So they didn't just think that African Americans should not be enslaved. They really thought they should be equal, which is not where everyone that was that's not where everyone was at that time. So they were very ahead of their time in a lot of ways. And they were they had the idea that people should be able to be individuals, so that Transcendentalists believes that if everyone could listen to his or her sort of higher calling and do what was right for him or her as an individual, then society would pretty much work, right? They did not think the opposite was true. So they did not think if we would all do what was good for the whole of society, that the individual would then generally be okay. Not really. They didn't really think that. They thought everyone needed to be able to be an individual, and really connect with their individuality, and that is what kind of helps society to work, right? So not it in fact it allowed it to work, is what they thought. They also had a very big connection with nature, and they believed that we could grow closer to God by experiencing nature. So protecting nature became a big issue for them, which was, before that, it was more that people were afraid of nature. That, like, kind of, now you've read Young Goodman Brown, right? Nathaniel Hawthorne, and like nature was scary. Like you could get lost in the forest and never be heard from again, or get eaten by a wild animal or something, right? I mean, like, it was scary. I mean, like, it was like really terrifying. And so we went from that to Henry David Thoreau with his work on Walden Pond, right? And so we have this new idea about that we need to protect nature, that we are nature's caretakers. And so that was a shift, right? And so that really, the Transcendentalists were very key in making that happen. So these group of folks, who's known as the leader of the Transcendentalists, the father of Transcendentalism, as he's called, Ralph Waldo Emerson. So author of Self-Reliance is one of his big essays, which is fabulous. You should read it. And there are others, right? So other things that he wrote. And so then we had Thoreau, we've had Lydia Maria Child. We had known for Over the River and Through the Woods to Grandmother's House We Go. That's what she's known for, but she wrote a lot of other things during the time that were well received. She was a Transcendentalist, connected with them. And Bronson Alcott, if that name may not be familiar to you, but if you may be familiar with Louisa May Alcott, his daughter, that wrote the novel Little Women, which has never been out of print in all these years, but made into many movies and all this. Her father was a big Transcendentalist. In fact, he was like the one that the rest of them thought, wow, he really gets it, because he like really lived it. And to the point that he started this community, an intentional communal living place called Fruitlands. And his idea of that was that, that we could live out our beliefs, and that people could be able to listen to their individual calling, and just just utopia, like utopian society. So he started this with this other guy, this Mr. Lane was his last name, and so their families and everything like that, and it was well intentioned. It was also a vegan society. Bronson Alcott he called himself a strict vegetarian. The word vegan had not been coined yet, but he ate no animal products, and that was kind of hard in 1850. Use no animal products, and that was hard in 1850. So instead of using an oxen for plowing, they did it themselves, and they would not use whale oil, which was common at the time, for lighting candles. They also, because they were very anti-slavery, they refused to wear cotton because cotton was made from slave labor, was picked, from slave labor, so they would not wear cotton. So they went to considerable lengths for their beliefs, but it was there were some problems with the situation because it was Massachusetts and the winter is very cold, and they weren't really prepared for that. They were out in the middle of nowhere. So there was that problem. They weren't really farmers. They were more intellectuals, writers, lecturers, that sort of thing. And they were trying to start this farming community. They're growing crops, and they don't really know too much about that other than having like a garden. And so when it would be time for the crops to come in, the Bronson Alcott and the other guy would be off lecturing on transcendentalism and kind of forgot all about it. But Bronson's wife and daughters would be there trying to get the crops in, and this sort of thing, because she was very practical and like somebody's got to get the crops in, right? So the whole thing ended up being rather disastrous. I mean, the cold did them in, and they didn't have enough food. They were running out of money. Things were rather dire, to the point that there was a big argument between Mr. Lane, I can't remember his first name, Mr. Lane, and Bronson Alcott. Mr. Lane he felt like Mrs. Alcott was just kind of, kind of getting in the way, and he actually wanted Bronson Alcott to like leave his wife and just leave them behind, and they'd start like this new thing, and Bronson Alcott was like, oh wait, no. So they were very happily married, and it was like, oh wait, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But he was very just so Mr. Lane, he left. He had like a son that they left. And so Bronson Alcott was so upset that his big dream just collapsed around him, and he was very depressed. He actually took to his bed. And so Mrs. Alcott had to get her brother to help, and so they could find a house to rent and kind of get bailed out a little bit. A lot, actually. So they had to regroup. It was very devastating. So Melville was not a transcendentalist, no, but he was connected with these folks. He was friends with some of them. He knew all about all these doings, right? He was for a time, there was another communal living community called, intentional living community called Brook Farm, which is a little more successful. And he had been to Brook Farm. He was connected with these folks. But he was connected with them, but he ultimately was not a transcendentalist. So the other thing that transcendentalists believed is that they believed that humans are basically good, that when they do bad things and go astray, that they're going astray from their good nature, but that humans are basically good. And that there really is not a presence of evil in humans. And Melville didn't believe that. He believed that, no, there is a presence of evil, right? And so he also looked at some of the beliefs and how it played out, and he wasn't sold on it, really. I think how does having all that background of what was going on in the country and in this movement here, how does that help to understand the story? Well, I think Melville kind of plays with that throughout. If you look at Bartleby and how he always says, I prefer not to, right? So how far can you take it to be an individual? I mean, how far can you really take it before it just like you finally have to kind of make some sort of concession to the greater society? I mean, like how far? You could take it pretty far, apparently, because he goes pretty far with it, Bartleby, right? I mean, like he goes pretty far to disrupt the entire office. The office is moving because they can't cope with him, right? In all of that, right? But ultimately, if you're refusing to even eat, right, you can't even keep yourself going, right? So I think like Melville being aware of